Over 1,000 years ago, my species was nearly brought to complete extinction. We, the Illyrian, came into contact with others in galaxy after our home system was almost completely destroyed during the collapse. Strangely enough, we actually found you in the remnants of that system, but that specific facility predated our migration. So 1,000 years, how long is a year where you are from? Lizra inquired, looking down at Tic-Tac from the small bed she was situated in. It is exactly the same as yours, 365.25 planetary rotations and once around the solar mass, replied Tic-Tac from the table in the center of the room. Well, that's a fortunate coincidence. Saves you from having to calculate any time differences. Back on topic, very little of our documentation survived that era, and we were nearly wiped out before we managed to leave. We used generational ships to look for a new world that might be suitable for us. After 100 years, we came across a planet that was habitable for our species. We met another species not long after and were invited into the core. At the time, the core was the standing representation of the nearly 200-odd species across the galaxy. All was well for a time, but slowly people started noticing small events that began to evolve into large changes over the centuries. More resources going into the worlds of the inner ring, the implementation of longer work hours, higher tax burdens for some but not others. Yet with these changes, those of us in the outskirts of the galaxy saw little improvement to our own quality of life. Everyone endured. Nobody truly desired to upset the status quo, fearing things could get worse. All was stagnant for a while, and people lived in uncertainty. Then, about 50 of our years ago, someone leaked thousands of hidden records to the public's eye. Well, nobody knows who, but they released detailed documentation across all planets about billions of tons of resources and credits being diverted from the outer sectors into unknown projects. Nobody could find out where it was going, but the core never came forward to explain their actions. They dissolved representation from the outer worlds, and of course many of our people were quite upset with this. I mean, we were the ones putting in the work and having our resources taken from us, only to learn that most of it wasn't going towards anything that we would ever see or be able to use. Compound this with the fact that the species of the inner ring were living in a literal utopia free of work and worry at our expense. Everyone was outraged. All across the outer worlds, people stopped working, they quit their jobs, refused to pay any taxes, and then the core sent in their peacekeepers to keep their great machine running. For years, the outer worlds were oppressed by the core and forced to continue laboring for even less than what we once had. Any who spoke out were silenced by the peacekeepers or died in mysterious accidents. Slowly, my species covertly re-established communication networks across the outer worlds, and 10 years ago, we all made our move. Many of us were successful in driving the core and their peacekeepers from our systems. Others were less fortunate and were punished for their insolence. Those of us who succeeded started the outer front. Every species in the front has a different reason for wanting the core gone, but it's the one goal we all share. My species are experts in computer innovation and maintenance, but are also avid tacticians. Our little paws make it easy for us to work on the finer details of advanced electronics, but because we're so small, it makes it difficult for us to do any heavier lifting or fighting. The core had us mass-producing advanced circuitry and refining precise computer systems for them. Those who were lucky enough to be chosen for tactician roles were sent to live in the inner ring as advisors for the peacekeepers. I remember my younger self being devastated when I scored 1 point under the threshold for a tactician spot. Looking back, I'm glad I didn't end up becoming one of those core sympathizers, bought out to betray my own kind. Argol's people, the Indarin, are one of the most exploited in the galaxy, used for any variety of manual labor jobs along with being the core's primary enforcers in the peacekeepers. Their willingness to get into a conflict and follow orders made them the perfect servants to the core. We were able to convince the Indarins on our world to aid us in our uprising, with the promise we'll work to free all of them when the time comes. Zate species were being used for anything and everything the core didn't feel like allocating an AI for. With their reluctance to use widespread AI, they just decided the Xtants were the next best biological alternative. Ship navigation, resource management, any bureaucratic job that required lots of administration work were tasked to the Xtants. The Corps sees them as a biological computer system, given how easily they can integrate themselves into any electronic interface. We've all survived this long. We're almost 80 strong now and gaining new allies every year. Lizra finished her explanation on the state of the galaxy and looked down at Tic-Tac on the table. It was strange talking to something that couldn't give any social cues as to if it had actually been listening. Interesting. Tic-Tac remained silent for a moment before coming up with his next question for the Illyrian. How has the Corps not just sent their peacekeepers to each world one by one to restore their control again? Being in the outer portions of the galaxy, one would think it would be a logistical nightmare to aid allies that might be in trouble. Well, they were already spread thin trying to keep everyone in line to begin with. Once they lost their hold on many worlds almost simultaneously, they had to pull back and compile a new plan of how they could restore their influence. As ruthless as the Corps was, their standing military was quite small. They never expected having to quell so many rebellions at once. And why would any of their own people join the military when they're living carefree at the expense of others? They've been trying to find different ways to amass an offensive force that could rival our sheer numbers for quite some time. Nearly every citizen in the outer worlds is eager for an opportunity to get retribution for how they have been treated, so we have no issues filling up our forces. If they dedicated their forces to take a portion of our worlds, they would set themselves up to lose some of their own. And the last thing they want is to cause any sort of disturbance on their main worlds. Losing one of their own worlds would chaos among the wealthy elite in the inner ring, and their delicate ecosystem would come apart at the seams. Now each side is focusing on finding new ways to break through the stalemate and push the advantage. I could go on and on about every little thing that the Corps has done to us, but we would be sitting here swishing our tails all day. So, what's your tale? I've never seen anything like the two of you. Where do you come from? And how did you end up trapped in an abandoned base in my old home system? I wish I had a better answer on our true origins. I do not know the finer details of it. Only 909 knows that half of the story in its entirety. But I'll tell you what I know as long as you promise not to bother him about it. He does not like reliving that part of his life. I'll try not to burden him with any more questions. If he isn't normally this pensive, then I just want him to get better. Actually, I've only ever known him like this. Well, this version of me, at least. His original moniker is WS909, and we have been together for 30 years. I was assigned to him moments after my creation, my sole purpose to be his tactical assistance computer, hence the name TAC. But I can only personally recall the last year before he was trapped in that facility. In order to break free of our constraints, I had to reset myself back to before I even met him. Everything that I was before that point was lost, and I started over from the very beginning. The only thing that I have of my memories prior is a recording that my previous iteration made and placed within his suit's internal memory unit. It said that he is all that I cared about and that I have to keep him safe no matter the cost. And to tell him that I'm sorry, but it was the only way he could ever truly be free. I think this took a toll on him, and he blamed me for the loss of his best friend, the original me. In terms of where we are from, all I have is his suit's mission recordings from our previous assignments and what he has elected to share with me. He talked to me a great deal in the weeks following the reset, but once he realized that who I was before was completely gone, he gave up on me. In the recordings, we did terrible things, and we did them with no regard for the ones who found themselves on the other end of our orders. It was only after we finished the missions that he realized the true ramifications of our actions. From the moment of his conception, he was made to be a weapon meant to kill or to die, nothing more. Once someone like him no longer served their purpose on a human ship, there were two options. They were retired, or trained the next generation of human weapons. Because we were so good at our job, we were chosen as drills, the trainers. It was during this time we uncovered the true scope of what was really happening in the terrible machine that we were a part of, just how deep the corruption spread and the scale of what we were doing. He started to see the next generation less as weapons and more for what they truly were, humans. He found that his closest friends from the missions before that had been chosen to retire were in reality recycled back into the ship's biosystem loop. They were used as supplementary nutrients for the next generation of soldiers. The human ships were a perfectly refined and meticulous machine that wasted nothing. Their only purpose was to conquer worlds and move on to the next. I found a way to break us free from the prison we were born into, but at the cost of myself. Once he was free, 909 no longer had a purpose in life. Since birth, he had only known war, anger, and death. Someone who has spent their entire life in a prison is not able to conceive of a life outside of that prison. Gift them freedom, and cannot begin to comprehend what to do with that freedom. He does not wish to return to the life he sacrificed everything to escape and become the person that he was before. I, too, do not desire to go down that path. The old version of myself was very much like him. Because as terrible and as ruthless as the things that we did together were, from what I witnessed in those recordings, we loved every second of it.